Come with me. We need to have a talk. What's up, guys? That guy with a pencil here from Dad. I do mean to have it on me and keep it on me at all times. You know, from time, I have 15 minutes to tell you my thoughts on the Irishima talks. The, I'd say, first major arc, of the Kagurabachi Part 2 flashback arc. And mainly the first major battle, as arguably you can see the first arc was just like getting used to this universe, and now we're going over this portion of the narrative. I do want to talk about the Irishima talks specifically. I may make a more general video on my thoughts on part 2 so far, because they are slightly distinct. But with it being the case, the Irishima talks are simultaneously the best of Kagurabachi and the... Wait, hold on, I forgot to start the timer. Hold on, I was about to go straight into it. Yeah, there's time. Alright, but the Irishima talks are simultaneously the best of Kagurabachi's strengths and the worst of Kagurabachi's weaknesses. Now, I am going to start with the weaknesses, just because I think there are very few, and ultimately, those are the core foundation of what I would say is kind of, you know, expected with Kagurabachi at this point by the nature of its narrative, but unfortunately will still proceed to haunt the narrative. The Irishima talks are 5 chapters. They start in chapter 117, and they end by chapter 121. Now, obviously, this is the opener. This is the foundation. This is laying the groundwork for the arc as a whole. And I was immediately going to go to positives for a sec. I'm still going to stick on the negatives. The issue with the Irishima talks being only 5 chapters deep is the continuation of a trend that Kagurabachi has. And notably, you can definitely argue that this is possibly even intentional by Hokuzono as, you know, a commentary on part 1 of Kagurabachi itself. But I'm sorry. When we got introduced to an elite squad of warriors in Kagurabachi, you know, sent to take down an extremely powerful adversary, did anyone think that this casting crew was gonna make it? Like for real, did anyone buy it? Did anyone think they were really going to be successful? Like, obviously not. No way they were going to be. We are in a flashback arc. But this continues the trend of introducing really cool character designs, really neat character concepts, and ideas, introducing an elite squad, and having them be washed. It's kind of the same thing we've seen once against Sojo, kind of sort of again against Samura, then again against Yura, then again against... Kind of, sorta. No, I wouldn't count to what happened to Akimoto Soga, because that was not an elite squad. That was a barely adult and a full-grown man. But with it being the case, the one weakness of the Irishima talks is Hiruto Soga, Yoshinojo Sojo, and Mashiro... What actually is his last name? What is your last name? Mashiro... Oh no, Shuji Mashiro. They are the weakness. If only for the fact that I knew that these characters were going to go, and thusly I couldn't necessarily find myself too directly engaged with any of their executions, because these characters barely exist. Like I said, the Irishima talks are only 5 chapters long. Yoshinojo Sojo and Hiruto Sojo... I'm saying Sojo because I messed up, because I see Nojo and I'm thinking Sojo. Now, Yoshinojo Soga and Hiruto Soga were destined to die, right? And so was Mashiro, honestly. We never got to mention the man in the future. We never got to mention Hiruto in the future. We never got to mention Yoshinojo in the future. Obviously, one of these characters is going to die. But it continues a trend of Kagurabachi introducing really cool character designs, really cool abilities, and then them being dead, sometimes within the same chapter, sometimes within 3 chapters, sometimes within 5 in this case. And that's just really, really unfortunate. I get it. Kagurabachi is a very, very fast-paced manga, and while I will definitely say I feel like Hokuzono Sensei has taken the notes of the extremely fast pacing and definitely not necessarily slowed down massively, but slowed down enough that it's noticeable. The pace of part 2 so far, now it's taking its time to establish characters, the world we are in, these character dynamics. That's good, but as cool as the battle and its aesthetics are, it does still ring a tad hollow because I don't know these characters. Sure, Hiruto's abilities are really, really cool. Yoshinojo, at least in terms of his character archetype, is one of my favorites. Mashiro is cool, but I just don't know these characters. And of course I wasn't going to know these characters because they were literally created to perish, but gosh darn it, man. However, That's my only point of negativity. Another elite squad gets wiped for the sake of hyping up a powerful antagonist, and we know this powerful antagonist will go down pretty soon due to the nature of the Enchanted Blades. It feels a little bit repetitive, and not in the it rhymes sense, but in the, okay, we've done this like 3-4 times before, can we possibly do something new? But that aside, the rest of the Irishima talks are fantastic, and let me explain why. Notably, the Irishima talks, and obviously this entire flashback to some degree, needs to do a lot of contextualization for the narrative we see in part 1. We are living in the future of this timeline, and we are seeing that when we are following Shikiro, we are following an older Shiba, when we're following literally everyone we know from the main, I can't say the main manga, it still is the main manga, but from part 1. And ultimately, we are essentially attempting to justify, if not necessarily justify is the wrong word. This whole thing exists to rationalize the necessity for the Enchanted Blades, right? Because obviously one of the biggest themes of Kagurabachi is, hey, who's responsible for things like this? And who's responsible for interpreting what these things mean? That's one of the most core foundational things. It's what Sojo as a character was all about in terms of interpreting the Enchanted Blades. And in terms of doing that, in terms of justifying the creation of the Enchanted Blades, yeah, I say this chapter and this set of chapters does a really good job at that. And of course, it does come through the jobbing of the elite organization of the strongest sorcerers. But hey, once again, unfortunately, that's kind of just how it goes in the Kagurabachi flow. But with it being the case, seeing the levels of power that these people were at, to the point where the top 4 sorcerers in Japan were nothing, is really, really, really effective jobbing, and a really good way to remind us just where things stand, and where things did stand before the creation of the Enchanted Blades. And I also do think a great thing about the Irishima talks is very specifically the context we are able to be given about the Mikaboshi. Considering they've been extremely vague, like the people of the island are kind of just a part of the narrative and a group to be wiped out by Akimoto, but like that's about it. But by seeing the context, seeing the propaganda surrounding the Mikaboshi, seeing their side of history, their side of the narrative, that's really, really good. Because as much as I do believe that Japan definitely would take the execution of presumably another, not clan head, we do know that technically that would end up being Shihiro's mom, I think, technically, by like proxy, because we're having the foresight power, but essentially 2 top Soga clan members, the leading clan of Japan and 2 of the strongest sorcerers. Soga literally described to be the apex of human ability, right? The limit of what there is physically. Demands exceptionally physical skills developed through immense training and actual swordplay. Hiroto Soga, the only living practitioner of the Kuretsuchi. So, this is great for showing us why the Enchanted Blades are needed. And I also think it's very, very important that it shows us why Akimoto Soga was still wrong. I was initially going to, funnily enough, my thoughts video was initially going to be about this, but it's such a, like, blatantly simple thought. I hope I don't make a whole my thoughts video on it, but yeah, I'm sorry, the nature of Oryu and the other 6 members of, or the other 5 members of the Mikaboshi with this extreme, crazy, next level Danseki power, they do not speak for every single Mikaboshi who was literally trapped underwater for who knows how many, well, not who knows how many, for multiple centuries. They didn't do all that. And ultimately, they don't deserve to be annihilated. I think it's very important to establish that by showing us the nature of the characters involved versus the nature of the masses who serve these characters. By seeing the Mikaboshi in this group of people hooded up, cloaked, and genuinely praying to the sacred stone. I don't know why. Whenever I say sacred stone, especially with that inflection, my brain goes to Legend of Zelda Twilight. Not Twilight Princess, Tears of the Kingdom. The wrong way. But that aside, to go out of, or for Hokuzono to go out of their way to establish and reinforce the idea that the Mikaboshi are a group of regular people who were forcibly ousted from their place of residence, only to be forced to live underground, underwater for literal generations. Yeah, I do completely understand why, one, they feel slighted, and two, why they put so much faith in the royal family in the first place, and why they ultimately have so much faith in the Dattenseki as something to be taken for their own, as they know the limits and dangers of his powers. Yet at the same time, all of this works to sort of not necessarily make Kunishige right, but make Kunishige like viable, reasonable, especially as Yura was fully ramping up into the ideas of your father made the world the way it is, the Enchanted Blade should have never existed. Like, ultimately, that is a lot of what Yura was talking about. We do get to see from Shiba's direct perspective what it would mean to fight someone with the power of the Dattenseki and how impossible it would have been. Ultimately, if Ryu ever came to the mainland, if he was manhandling the literal apex of human abilities, and by manhandle I mean actually straight manhandle him, then yeah, unfortunately, everything that there is does sort of point to the Enchanted Blades not necessarily being, I don't want to call them a necessary evil though, but a sense that I understand why they were made, but I don't think they were used appropriately by the person who was, using it the most and the most effectively in the end. And of course, another thing I think, ladies, so I've talked about how the Irishima talks technically kind of sort of fails on just a continuous Kagurabachi principle. You could argue it's just part of the narrative writing style. We're always going to get these arcs that introduce very powerful characters, quote unquote, and then to have them immediately job to an even more powerful character. But I think another thing that is very, very important that I do like is all the sorcery explanations. One of the things that I greatly appreciate is when we get at least a slight understanding of how abilities work, and notably the Irishima talks is full of them. The only character to not get an explicit ability name drop are any of the Mikaboshi, even literally Prince Aryu himself, ironically enough, and also Brain. I don't even know who the also was. My brain absolutely lost it. But with it being the case, going out of our way to see what they see and understand where these characters are coming from is a good thing. And notably, I think the idea that Shiba in specific was left behind for his ability to teleport and ultimately be the one to have to live with this guilt of failing his fellow friends and his allies, essentially, when he could have probably very easily teleported them all out of here once he realized that things were going bad, it ultimately works because of presumably the counter response to the Mikaboshi and their existence and how they're applying it will sort of directly mirror the creation of the Enchanted Blades. This piece of the arc, the Irishima talks themselves, have laid a fantastic setup for the entire rest of the narrative. I'm not going to say going forward, not necessarily coming to light, because up to this point, a lot of this era was very, very vague. It wasn't very clear on what anything really happened was, but we are getting that clarity. We are getting to see these characters interact. Of course, will we see any of these characters again? Yeah, we're going to see Shiba and Arya again, but not necessarily anybody else. And I think that is both the blessing and the curse of Kagurabachi. Ultimately, by having such a lightning fast pacing, such an amazing ability to quickly establish, explain, and essentially buckle down with characters and buckle down with the reader to make sure that they understand the character, and very, very strong characterization, Hokuto Sensei is able to get a lot out of these characters who literally don't even have a total 10 chapters of screen time. I think Yoshinojo himself appears in like 50 panels. And be like, that's a lot of panels. Not for not for that many chapters. And I'm not even talking full panels. I'm talking separate, little tiny stuff. That's how relevant he is. But even still, Hokuto Sensei does a fantastic job characterizing him as the intelligent smoky demon archetype in this limited amount of time and through their design and through their personality. Same thing with anything that having to do with the other members of the crew. I say Mashiro is especially impressive because the way the fan base has latched onto him, and he's sort of been like the foundation for the whole maybe Akamura Soga had a point thing, even though he definitely didn't. They already surrendered. All that aside, I do think that Hokuto Sensei's pen is on fire. The critiques I mentioned earlier are, unfortunately, as I also mentioned earlier, a foundational custom to Hokuto's writing at this point. Can't wait for the next squad. But if this is going to be what it is, not necessarily, I keep saying excusing or justifying, but rationalizing the decision for the creation of the Enchanted Blades is very, very important, as it does act as the foundation for the narrative as we know it. No Enchanted Blades, no narrative, no nothing. And seeing everything here I keep saying justifying, manifesting the Irishima talks in this way is a fantastic example of how to blend narrative storytelling in terms of like character writing, and also just narrative storytelling as in the application of the narrative to characters. The removal of Yoshinojo, of Hiruto, of everybody was considered, but ultimately it just wasn't enough. And I think that's what I like the most about the Irishima talks on both sides. It wasn't enough for either side to lay out their terms and just come to a genuine agreement. No, it had to come down to this battle. And it was a battle that the Mikaboshi readily won. So now from this point on, I'm very excited to see how these characters will react to these positions that they've been placed in, as ultimately there is so much yet unknown and unseen about the nature of the leaders of the Mikaboshi and their strongest. 6 strongest warriors, 6 enchanted blades. Boy, do I wonder who the final battle of this arc is going to be. But with it being the case, I am out of time. So if you haven't always seen this video, please do me a favor and leave talking on Irishima. Instead of the Irishima talks, talking on Irishima. Leave that down below. I want to thank you so much for watching. Leave a like, share, comment, and subscribe. Make sure that little notifications will see myself and any videos I come to the channel. Now I want to thank you so much for watching once again, and I hope you guys have a wonderful day. This is that guy with the pencil, writing off. I'd like to give a thank you to our sketch tier members: Eternal Flame, Redwolf 4765, Astro, Glacier XZ, Zera, J2MA, Buddha Ura, Yuki Ally, Grim, Ollie, Corey Watson, Damon Brown, Tim Thomas, Kaving, RXN, Dead Meme, Kian Stewart, Edwin Igbinova, Straw, Antavius Mitchell, Super Flame Zero, Weary Exile, Alex Kenny, Todd, The Practical One, Landon Clapwick, Heath Nelson, CAET, Plant Crone, Brandon Payne, Multi-Batman Superman, Zalim, Sleepin' John, The Young Family, Pastel Pandora, Mo City King DKG, Akolade Babatunde, Union Eye, Athenzi Shear, Sino King, CCC, Enzo, Kitty Liddy, Axis XC, Praise the Sun, Magic, Andrine Bonnet, Scion, John Malcolm, Black Doctor Strange, Donovan McIntosh, at JDog2656, Aswin Hedi Presetia, Sheesh King, Yo Extras, and AZ Void. Then I'd even thank you to our line art tier patrons: Dread Zoen, Kevin Encarnacion, Lucas Stace, Midnight Lord 21, and Sean. Then I'd like to give a thank you to our ink tier member, Shrimpo the Fourth Shrimp 06. And I'd like to give a thank you to our digital art tier member, Jay Warrior. Then I'd like to give a thank you to our colored art tier patrons, Walkie Munoz and Walkie Munoz.